is called, that means this part is called function definition. It is called function definition. So function signature and function definition. So in the function signature, whatever the parameters we pass, in the function signature we pass the parameter. We call this as formal parameter. And whenever you are calling a function, and you are passing some value into that parameter, and this is called as actual parameter. So whatever the parameters are defined within the function, in the function signature, we call them formal parameters. And the parameter values that we pass, generally you can say the parameters that we pass while calling the function, they are called actual parameters. So functions are defined with formal parameters and actual parameters are defined with formal and actual parameters. So technically, uses parameters in order to modify the functionality. So the parameters defined in function signature is known as are known as formal parameters. And the parameters defined in function call are known as actual parameters. So syntax is like this. For example, we have a function and print and param1, and that is the parameter. So here this param1 is a formal parameter. So that is a formal parameter. Param1 is a formal parameter. And we call print here, and we pass some value into it. And we call this as actual parameter. And important is every formal parameter is by default mandatory. Every formal parameter is by default mandatory. So if you have a parameter, you have to define the parameter. Every formal parameter is by default mandatory. That means in this example, I want this print numbers in such a way that it can change its count of printing numbers. Then how we can do that? How we can modify? Simply, here we can define print numbers, a parameter. A parameter is, suppose, so number, count. Count is what type? It is a number type. Count is a number type. That means it is having a parameter called count, and it is a number type. And if there is a parameter, you can observe automatically the print numbers function is showing as an error. Why? Because every parameter is by default mandatory. Of course, every formal parameter is by default mandatory. And important, you can define optional parameter as optional by using null reference character. By using null reference character. That means if I want the parameter as optional, then I can simply put here question mark. That means null reference character. That is optional parameter. Optional parameter. So general, how we define that? So we have function, print, and a parameter, and a type, and this is the function actually. Optional parameters are defined with question mark. That makes the parameter as optional. So that makes the parameter as optional. Optional parameter. So every parameter by default is mandatory to define. So here what we are doing, print numbers, and here we can simply change the logic for less than or equal to count. We will print count less than or equal to count. That means this time how many numbers to print, that depends on this count. That depends on the count. That means now whenever we call this, we have to pass a number parameter. And here suppose I am passing some string, it is invalid because it is expecting only a number parameter. So I will define here as 5. Then it will print 5 numbers. And here I define 3. Then it will print 3 numbers. That means now it is modified. So the functions are modified. First, it will print 5 numbers. Second, it will print 3 numbers. You can see that. It is printing 1 to 5. After that, it is printing 1 to 3. That means to handle reusability of a function, means to handle the reusability in a code, we write these functions to reuse the logic. So reusability, several ways we can do that I will show you now. So in OOPS, how reusability comes, we will discuss about that. Here important is we are reusing this function by calling it, and whenever you are calling the function, you have to follow some basic rules. So every parameter that is defined by default is mandatory. You have to pass the parameter. And parameters are usually used to modify the functionality. So to modify or append the functionality of any particular function, we need parameters. So technically, what are formal parameters and what are actual parameters? That is an important one. This is a simple example of parameters. Another important point is function can be defined with multiple parameters. Function can be defined with multiple parameters. And as I told you, every parameter is mandatory. A function can be defined with multiple parameters. Here, one new concept is there. We will discuss about that. That means a function can be defined with more than one parameter. For example, suppose I will say print product. And here, print product is a function. I am changing the parameters into this function. Print product is a function which is expecting. So ID as number, ID, or simply name as a string, and the price as number. Now, both parameters are mandatory. So it's important that we have to pass both parameters, that is name and price. When we pass name and price, it will print console.log. So it will print name is equal to $name. And next line, and we have a price is equal to $price. Okay, it is going to print those details. But important is generally we are saying that both are mandatory. Now when I call this, we need to pass print product. So print product is a function. Into the function we are passing